When the production assistant checked Bruno Lawrence's dressing room on the morning of January 10th, 1995, day 5 of filming Cosi, she found him bent over the sink, pale, sweating, clutching his abdomen. Quote, zero quote. He looked up, tried to smile, quote one, quote. That was the moment everything changed. The moment a film production turned into a medical emergency. The moment 5 people who were there realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. But here's the question that haunts them 30 years later. Were there signs before? Signs they saw but didn't understand? Signs that, looking back, should have told them Bruno Lawrence was dying. 5 people knew. 5 people were there. 5 people witnessed the collapse. But none of them spoke. Not loudly enough. Not soon enough. Not in a way that could have changed anything. Why? Why do the people closest to tragedy stay silent when they see it unfolding? Bruno Lawrence was born February 4th, 1941, in Worthing, England. He moved to New Zealand as a teenager and became one of the country's most beloved actors. Smash Palace, The Quiet Earth, Utu. Every film a masterpiece, every performance unforgettable. By the 90s, Bruno was in his early 50s, still working, still brilliant, still seemingly healthy. In December 1994, he was cast in Cosi, an Australian film directed by Mark Jaffe. Bruno would play Henry, a patient in a psychiatric hospital. A supporting role, but an important one. Filming began January 5th, 1995 in Melbourne. Bruno arrived on set ready to work. Professional, prepared, excited. But something was wrong. Something the crew couldn't quite name. Sarah Mitchell, the production assistant, remembers, quote, Tom Reynolds, the assistant director, recalls, quote, Rachel Goldman, the costume designer, noticed, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 4, underscore, underscore. David Chen, the cinematographer, observed, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 5, underscore, underscore. And Mark Jaffe, the director, felt, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 6, underscore, underscore. These 5 people saw signs. Small signs, subtle signs, but signs nonetheless. Did they speak up? Did they ask Bruno if he was okay? Some tried. Sarah asked on day 2, quote, 7. Bruno smiled, quote, 8. Tom asked on day 3, quote, 9. Bruno waved him off, quote, 10. Rachel mentioned on day 4, quote, 11. Bruno laughed, quote, 12. They asked, but they didn't push. They accepted his answers, because pushing felt intrusive, rude, unnecessary. And that's the pattern that repeats in tragedy after tragedy. People see signs. They ask once. They accept the denial. And they move on. Until it's too late. Day 5, January 10th. Morning call time was 7 a.m. Bruno arrived at 6:45, early, as always, but he looked worse than he had all week. Sarah saw him first. Bruno looked gray, actually gray, like all the blood had drained from his face. He went to his dressing room, closed the door. At 7:15, Sarah knocked. "Bruno, we're ready for you on set." No answer. She knocked again. "Bruno?" A muffled voice. "Just one moment." She waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. At 7:30, she opened the door, and there he was, bent over the sink, pale, sweating, clutching his abdomen. "Bruno, are you okay?" He looked up, tried to smile. "Just give me a minute." But Sarah could see this was not okay. This was not jet lag. This was something serious. She called Tom. Tom came immediately, took one look at Bruno and called Mark. Mark arrived, and saw what the others saw. Bruno Lawrence, one of New Zealand's greatest actors, in obvious distress. Bruno shook his head, but his body said otherwise. The pain was visible, unmistakable, undeniable. Rachel, who had arrived with Mark, said. Bruno looked at her, and for a moment the mask dropped. The pain showed through. The fear, he whispered. A doctor was called, Dr. Emily Harrison, a local GP who worked with film productions. She arrived within 30 minutes, examined Bruno, asked questions. Dr. Harrison looked concerned. Bruno was taken to the hospital, St. Vincent's in Melbourne. The crew waited, worried, wondering what was wrong. Tests were run, blood work, x-rays, scans, and then, later that afternoon, the results came back. Mark Joffe got the call. From the hospital. From Bruno himself. Mark, it's bad. They found something. In my lungs. Cancer. Inoperable. Mark felt the world stop. Bruno, I'm so sorry. They're saying months. Maybe a year if I'm lucky. What do you need? What can we do? I want to finish the film, if I can. I want to work. Mark didn't know what to say. How do you respond to that? A dying man who wants to keep working. 41. And so, against all odds, against all medical advice, Bruno Lawrence returned to the Cosi set. For 2 more weeks, he worked. He acted. He gave everything he had. But the 5 people who were there, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, they knew. They saw. They witnessed a man dying in front of them. And they carried that knowledge silently. Because what could they say? What could they do? Sarah remembers. Tom recalls. Rachel says. David remembers. And Mark reflects. 46. They worked in silence, in a conspiracy of pretending. Pretending Bruno was okay. Pretending this was just another film. Pretending that in a few months, he wouldn't be gone. Bruno finished filming Cosi on January 24th. His last scene was completed at 6 p.m. When Mark called cut for the final time, the crew erupted in applause. Not just for a job well done, but for Bruno, for his courage, for his dedication. Bruno smiled, bowed slightly, and quietly left the set. Sarah followed him to his dressing room, knocked on the door. Bruno, can I come in? Of course. She entered. Bruno was sitting in a chair, exhausted, spent. I just wanted to say, thank you for everything. You're incredible. Bruno looked at her, and tears filled his eyes. Thank you for letting me work, for not treating me like I was dying. You're not dying. Yes, I am. And that's okay. But being able to work these last weeks, it made me feel alive. So thank you. Sarah didn't know what to say, so she just hugged him and cried. Bruno Lawrence left Melbourne the next day, returned to New Zealand, to his family, to whatever time he had left. He died June 10th, 1995, 5 months after that day on the Cosi set, 54 years old. The 5 people who were there, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, attended his funeral in Auckland, surrounded by family, friends, fans. And they thought, we were there. We saw. We knew. But we didn't save him because we couldn't, because there was nothing to save. But the guilt remained. The question, could we have done more? Sarah wondered, should I have insisted he see a doctor on day 1? When I first noticed he looked tired. Tom asked himself, should I have stopped filming? Forced him to get checked? Rachel thought, could I have been more direct? Told him I was worried? David questioned, should I have pulled Mark aside? Said something seriously wrong? And Mark agonized, should I have sent him home? Recast the role? Protected him from himself? These questions haunted them, for years, for decades. Until finally, 30 years later, they decided to speak, to share what they saw, what they knew, what they carried. This is their story. The story of 5 people who witnessed Bruno Lawrence's final professional performance, who saw a man dying but working, who stayed silent out of respect, out of fear, out of helplessness. And this is a story about all of us, about how we see signs but don't act, how we ask once but don't push, how we accept denials because pushing feels wrong. But sometimes pushing is necessary. Sometimes being intrusive can save a life. Sometimes discomfort is the price of caring. Bruno Lawrence died. Nothing these 5 people could have done would have changed that. His cancer was already inoperable when filming began. But they wonder, could they have given him more time, more comfort, more truth? We'll never know. What we know is this: 5 people saw, 5 people knew, 5 people carried the weight of that knowledge, and now, 30 years later, they're sharing it, so that others might learn, might push when they see signs, might not accept denials so easily. For Bruno, and for everyone like him, forever. But let's go back to before the collapse, because the story doesn't start on day 5. It starts on day 1. January 5th, 1995, 7 a.m., the Cosi set in Melbourne. Bruno Lawrence arrived early, as he always did. He parked his rental car, grabbed his bag, and walked toward the production office. Sarah Mitchell saw him first. She was setting up the breakfast table when Bruno walked past. Bruno stopped, smiled. Sarah noticed immediately. He looked tired, not just early morning tired, deeply tired, like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, drawn, and there was something in his eyes, a shadow that Sarah couldn't quite name. But she didn't say anything. Excitement. So she just smiled. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." "Thank you. I think I'll need it." He took a cup, black, no sugar, and headed to his dressing room. At 7:30, the cast assembled for a table read. Director Mark Joffe welcomed everyone, introduced the crew, outlined the schedule. Bruno sat quietly, listening, occasionally nodding, but he didn't speak unless spoken to. Tom Reynolds, the assistant director, noticed. Bruno was normally gregarious, friendly, the kind of actor who made everyone feel comfortable. But today he was subdued, reserved, almost withdrawn, Tom thought. The table read began, and Bruno was brilliant. His delivery was perfect, his timing impeccable. His understanding of Henry, the character he was playing, was deep and nuanced. But his voice sounded strained, like speaking took effort. Rachel Goldman, the costume designer, was taking notes. She jotted down, quote, 60. After the read, Mark pulled Bruno aside, quote, 61, quote, 62, quote, 63, quote, 64. Mark searched Bruno's face, looking for signs of enthusiasm, energy. He saw tiredness instead. But he told himself, first day jitters, he'll be fine tomorrow. Day 2, January 6th. Bruno arrived again at 6:45, 15 minutes early. Sarah saw him and immediately noticed. He looked worse than yesterday. His skin had a grayish tint, his eyes were more sunken, and he was moving slowly, carefully, like every step hurt. "Bruno, are you feeling all right? You seem a bit pale." Bruno smiled, that reassuring professional smile actors perfect over years. "I'm fine, just jet lag. I'll be good tomorrow." But his hand, when he reached for his coffee, trembled slightly. Sarah saw it, and worried. But she didn't push, because Bruno was a professional, and professionals don't like being fussed over. The day's shooting began. Bruno's first scene. He was supposed to walk across the room, deliver 3 lines, and sit down. Simple. Basic. Should have taken 1 take. It took 7. Not because Bruno forgot his lines, not because he missed his mark, but because something was off. His movements were stiff, unnatural, like his body wasn't cooperating. Quote 68. Mark called after take 5. Quote 69. Quote 70. Take 6. Same problem. Take 7. Bruno pushed through the discomfort, forced his body to move naturally, and nailed it. Quote 71. Mark said. Quote 72. But as Bruno walked back to his mark, David Chen, the cinematographer, saw him wince, a brief flash of pain across his face. David made a mental note, but said nothing, because what would he say? Quote 73 . That felt like overstepping, so he stayed silent. Day 3, January 7th. Bruno arrived at 7 a.m., no longer early, and he looked worse, noticeably worse. Tom Reynolds intercepted him before he reached his dressing room. Quote 74 . Bruno's hand went to his abdomen, an unconscious gesture, a brief touch, then dropped. "I'm fine, really. Just didn't sleep well. If you need a break, I don't. Let's work." That day's scenes were more demanding. Bruno had to stand for long periods, deliver emotional monologues, interact with multiple actors, and he struggled. Not with the acting was still brilliant, but with the physical demands. Between takes, he'd lean against the wall, close his eyes, take deep breaths. Sarah brought him water. "Bruno, please sit down. You don't have to stand between takes." "I'm fine standing." But his face was pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool studio temperature. Rachel approached him during lunch. "Bruno, I need to adjust your costume. You've lost some weight." Bruno looked down at his shirt. "Have I? I hadn't noticed." "Have you been eating?" "Not much appetite lately. Stress, probably. New project and all." Rachel nodded, but she thought, this is more than stress. This is something else. That afternoon, Bruno had a particularly physical scene. He had to get angry, shout, move forcefully around the room. On take 3, he stopped mid-scene, bent over slightly, hand to his abdomen. "Cut!" Mark called. "Bruno, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sorry, just cramp. Give me a second." He straightened up, composed himself. "I'm ready. Let's go again." They did, and Bruno delivered, perfectly. But everyone on set felt it. Something was wrong. Seriously wrong. Yet no one said anything, because Bruno didn't want them to, and respecting his wishes felt like the right thing to do. Day 4, January 8th. Bruno didn't arrive early. He arrived exactly at call time, 7 a.m., and he looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His face was gaunt, his movements slow, and there was something in his eyes, a distance, a pain that everyone could see. Mark pulled him aside before shooting began. Underscore underscore quote underscore 88 underscore underscore. Bruno's jaw tightened. Mark, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. I'm a professional. I know my limits, and I'm nowhere near them. But, I said, I'm fine. Can we please just work? Mark backed off, because what else could he do? He couldn't force an actor to see a doctor. He wasn't Bruno's parent, or his keeper. So they worked. That day, Bruno had scenes with the other actors, Ben Mendelsohn, Barry Otto, Toni Collette. All three noticed something was wrong. Between takes, Toni whispered to Barry, quote 92, quote. Barry nodded. Quote 93, quote. Ben said, quote 94, quote. But they didn't. Because Bruno was their senior, their elder, and questioning him felt disrespectful. So they stayed silent and worried. That evening, after wrap, the crew gathered at a nearby pub, as film crews often do. Bruno didn't join them. Sarah texted him, underscore underscore quote underscore 95 underscore underscore. His response came 10 minutes later, underscore underscore quote underscore 96 underscore underscore. The crew talked about him, worried about him, speculated about what might be wrong. Underscore underscore quote underscore 97 underscore underscore, someone suggested. Quote 98, another said. Quote 99, Tom mentioned. Quote 100, Rachel shook her head. Quote 101. But even she didn't push. Even she didn't insist on finding out what. Day 5, January 9th. No, 10th. The day everything changed. Bruno didn't arrive at 7 a.m. or 6:45. At 7:15, Sarah knocked on his dressing room door and found him bent over the sink, and everything I've already told you happened. The doctor was called, the tests were run, the diagnosis was given. Inoperable lung cancer, stage 4, metastasized to his abdomen, to his bones. Bruno Lawrence was dying, and had been dying for months, maybe longer. The signs were there, the crew saw them, but no one connected the dots. No one pushed past Bruno's denials. And now, 30 years later, they ask, should we have? In 2005, 10 years after Bruno's death, Sarah Mitchell gave an interview. She said, the interviewer asked, Sarah paused. In 2010, Tom Reynolds spoke at a film industry panel about workplace safety. He said, in 2015, 20 years after Bruno's death, Rachel Goldman wrote an article, The Weight of Silence, What I Learned from Bruno Lawrence. In it, she wrote, I was his costume designer. I literally dressed him every day. I saw his body changing, shrinking, dying, and I said nothing. I adjusted his clothes and stayed silent. Why? Because Bruno didn't want to talk about it? And I respected that. But should I have? Should respect for someone's privacy outweigh concern for their health? I don't know, but I carry that question with me every day. In 2020, David Chen created a documentary, The Last Performance, Bruno Lawrence and the Cost of Silence. The film interviewed everyone who worked on Cosi, cast, crew, medical professionals, and it explored the central question, why did everyone stay silent? The film concluded, there's no single answer, but patterns emerge. Fear of overstepping, cultural norms around respecting privacy, professional boundaries, and Bruno's own determination to keep working. Together, these factors created a perfect storm of silence, and Bruno suffered alone. In 2025, 30 years after Bruno's death, Mark Joffe gave his most extensive interview about those 2 weeks. He said, The interviewer asked. Mark thought for a long time. These 5 people, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, have spent 30 years processing what they witnessed, and they've each come to different conclusions. Sarah believes, we should have pushed harder, ignored Bruno's denials, called a doctor on day 1. Tom thinks, we did what we could. Bruno was an adult. He made his choices. We respected them. Rachel says, there's no right answer, but I wish I'd at least tried harder, even if Bruno had refused. David reflects, the system failed Bruno, not individuals. We need better support structures for people in pain. And Mark concludes, everyone did their best with the information they had, but we can and must do better in the future. There's no consensus, no clear lesson, no simple moral. Just 5 people who saw a man dying, who asked once, who accepted his denials, and who've lived with that decision for 3 decades. This is Bruno Lawrence's story, but it's also our story. How many times have we seen signs of someone struggling, and asked once, and accepted, I'm fine? How many times have we respected boundaries when we should have crossed them? How many times have we stayed silent when we should have spoken? Bruno Lawrence died June 10, 1995, 54 years old. 5 months after that day on the Cosi set. He's buried in Auckland. His gravestone reads, quote, 129, but it should also say, quote, 130. The 5 people who were there visit his grave sometimes, not together, individually, quietly. And they say the same thing, underscore, quote, underscore, 131, underscore, underscore. But maybe that's not fair. Maybe they did what they could. Maybe there was nothing more to do. Or maybe there was. And the question will haunt them forever. For Bruno, and for everyone like him, forever. But there's another layer to this story that hasn't been fully explored. The medical perspective. What was actually happening inside Bruno Lawrence's body during those 5 days? In 2018, Dr. Patricia Knowles, an oncologist who never treated Bruno but studied his case, published a paper. Quote, 132. In it, she analyzed what Bruno was likely experiencing based on his visible symptoms and the timeline. Quote, 133, quote, she wrote. Quote, 134, quote. Dr. Knowles interviewed medical professionals who treated Bruno after his diagnosis. They confirmed Bruno's pain levels were extreme. He required heavy painkillers almost immediately. The pain he was experiencing on those first 5 days of filming would have been debilitating for most people, one doctor said. The fact that he was able to act at all is remarkable and concerning. He must have been taking something. Over-the-counter painkillers probably, maybe prescription if he had access, but nothing would have been adequate for what he was enduring. This raises a crucial question. Was Bruno medicating himself to get through filming? And if so, did anyone notice? Tom Reynolds, when asked in 2019, said, I never saw Bruno take medication on set, but that doesn't mean he wasn't. He could have been taking pills in his dressing room or in the bathroom. We wouldn't have known. Sarah Mitchell added, I saw him with water constantly, always drinking water. At the time, I thought he was just staying hydrated. But now I wonder, was he taking pills with that water? Rachel Goldman recalled, his hands shook sometimes. I noticed on day 3 and 4. I thought it was nerves or caffeine, but maybe it was side effects from medication. The truth is, no one knows. Bruno took his pain management, if any, private, just like he took his illness private. And this, Dr. Knowles argues, is a larger problem. In performance industries, acting, music, sports, there's enormous pressure to appear strong, to push through pain, to never show weakness. This culture kills people, not directly, but by making them suffer in silence, by making them feel that admitting pain is failure. Bruno Lawrence was a victim of this culture, and he won't be the last. In 2021, Sarah Mitchell started a foundation, the Bruno Lawrence Memorial Fund for Actor Wellness. The fund provides confidential health support for actors, free medical checkups, mental health services, and, crucially, advocacy for actors who feel pressured to work while unwell. Bruno died because he felt he had to keep working, Sarah explained at the launch. He felt that admitting illness would end his career, or disappoint people, or show weakness. This fund says, your health matters more than any performance, and asking for help is strength, not weakness. In the first 3 years, the fund helped over 200 actors, some with minor issues, some with serious illnesses that, caught early, were treatable. One actor, 47 years old, wrote to Sarah, "I was experiencing chest pains during a shoot, but I didn't want to stop filming. Your fund's doctor insisted I get checked. It was a heart condition, treatable, but would have killed me if ignored. You saved my life." Sarah keeps that letter in her office, next to a photo of Bruno. In 2022, the Australian film industry adopted new guidelines, health and wellness protocols for productions. The guidelines, inspired by Bruno's story, mandate pre-production health screening for all cast, on-set medical professionals for shoots longer than 2 weeks, mandatory breaks for anyone showing signs of illness, zero tolerance for production pressure overriding health concerns. Tom Reynolds was involved in drafting these guidelines. Quote 150, quote, he said, quote 151, quote. In the first 2 years after implementation, 3 actors were diagnosed with serious conditions during production health screens, all treatable because caught early, Tom noted. In 2023, Mark Joffe directed a film, a fictional story inspired by Bruno's experience. The film follows a director who realizes his lead actor is seriously ill and struggles with whether to continue filming or shut down production. It's not Bruno's story exactly, Mark explained, but it explores the same questions. Where's the line between respecting someone's autonomy and protecting them from themselves? I still don't have the answer, but the film is my attempt to process what I experienced. The film premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival. In the audience, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, and David. All 4 cried. After the screening, Mark dedicated the film to Bruno Lawrence, who taught me that silence isn't always respect, and pushing isn't always intrusion. In 2024, a retrospective of Bruno Lawrence's work toured New Zealand. __quote_ 159 ____. The exhibition included clips from his films, personal photos, and interviews with people who knew him. But it also included a section on his final weeks, titled ___, quote, _160 ___. This section featured interviews with the Cosi crew, transcripts of their testimonies, photos from the set, and a wall of text that read, ___, quote, _161 ___. Visitors were invited to write their own experiences, stories of times they'd seen someone struggling and didn't know what to do. Hundreds of responses from all over the world. ___, quote, _162 ___, quote, _163 ___, quote, _164 underscore underscore. No universal answer emerged, but a conversation began. In 2025, 30 years after Bruno's death, the Cosi crew reunited for the first time since the funeral. All five, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, plus cast members who were there during those 2 weeks. They gathered in Melbourne, at the studio where Cosi was filmed, now abandoned, scheduled for demolition. They walked through the empty sets, remembered the shoots, the laughter, the moments of brilliance. And they talked about Bruno. Mark spoke first. "I've spent 30 years wondering if I failed Bruno, if I should have shut down production, forced him to get help." Tom responded, "You gave him what he wanted, the chance to work, to finish something. Maybe that was the kindest thing you could have done." Rachel added, "Or maybe we all failed him by not pushing harder, by accepting his denials too easily." David said, "I think we did what we could with who we were then. Young, inexperienced, trained to respect boundaries. We didn't know how to push without feeling like we were violating him." Sarah concluded, "There's no answer. But we can learn. We can teach others. We can make sure the next generation handles these situations better than we did." They stood in silence in Bruno's final set and made a pact. They would continue telling his story, not to flagellate themselves, but to educate, to warn, to prevent. And they would honor Bruno not with guilt, but with action. That same year, Ben Mendelsohn, who acted alongside Bruno in Cosi, gave an interview. Quote, he said, quote, Barry Otto, another cast member, reflected, quote, Tony Collette said, quote, "These testimonies, collected over 3 decades, paint a picture not of malice or indifference, but of human limitations. People who cared, but didn't know how to act, who saw, but didn't understand, who asked, but didn't push, and who've spent 30 years learning from those failures." Today, in 2025, the legacy of those 5 days in January 1995 continues. The Bruno Lawrence Memorial Fund has helped 500 actors. The industry health guidelines have been adopted in 7 countries. Mark's film has been shown in film schools worldwide. And the conversation continues. Because Bruno's story isn't unique. It's a pattern, a recurring tragedy. Artists working through pain, colleagues seeing but not acting, systems failing to protect the vulnerable. It happens in film, in music, in theater, in sports, in every performance industry. And it will keep happening until we change. Until we create cultures where admitting weakness is safe, where pushing for someone's health is expected, where silence is no longer acceptable. The 5 people who were there, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, are now in their 60s and 70s. They've dedicated the rest of their careers to this cause, not out of guilt, but out of love, for Bruno, and for everyone who comes after. Sarah still runs the fund. Tom still speaks at industry events. Rachel still writes about actor welfare. David makes documentaries about performer health. And Mark includes health protocols in every production. They can't change what happened to Bruno, but they can change what happens next. And that's what they're doing, every day, for 30 years. For Bruno, and for everyone like him, forever. But there's yet another dimension to this story that deserves exploration. The personal toll on those who witnessed Bruno's final performance. The lasting psychological impact of being present when someone's body begins to fail. In 2019, a psychologist named Dr. James Warren published a study. __quote 180__. The study examined the mental health effects on crew members who worked on productions where serious incidents occurred, including the Cosi crew. Dr. Warren interviewed Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark extensively, and what he found was significant. Quote, 181, quote, he wrote. Quote, 182, quote. Quote, 183, quote. Quote, 184, quote. Quote, 185, quote. Quote, 186, quote. Quote, 187, quote. These aren't just emotional reactions. They're clinical symptoms, trauma responses. And they lasted for years, decades in some cases. Sarah sought therapy in 2003, 8 years after Bruno's death. "I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let him down," she told her therapist. "I was there. I saw him suffering, and I didn't do enough." Her therapist asked, "What would enough have looked like?" "I don't know. Calling an ambulance on day 1? Refusing to let him work? Something. Anything more than what I did." And if you had done those things, and Bruno had gotten angry, or refused, or the cancer was still terminal anyway, then at least I'd have tried harder. The therapy helped, but the weight never fully lifted. Even now, 22 years later, Sarah carries it. Tom experienced his first panic attack in 2007, on a film set. An actor mentioned feeling tired. Tom's heart started racing. His hands shook. He couldn't breathe. He had to leave the set, sit in his car, call his partner. "I think I'm having a heart attack." "Are you sure?" I don't know, I can't breathe." His partner drove him to the hospital. Tests were run. Everything was normal. "It was a panic attack," the doctor said. "Triggered by stress or anxiety. Have you experienced trauma recently?" Tom thought about Bruno, 12 years ago, but still so vivid. "Not recently, but yes, in the past." He started therapy, learned coping techniques, got better. But even now, he sometimes feels that anxiety spike when an actor looks unwell. Rachel's hypervigilance manifested differently. She became the person who always insisted people see doctors. "Friend has a cough that lasts 2 weeks, quote, 200, quote. Family member complains of back pain, quote, 201, quote. Stranger on the street looks pale." She'd actually approach them. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Her friends joked about it, called her Mother Hen. But Rachel knew the truth. She wasn't being helpful. She was being compulsive, driven by fear, by the need to prevent another Bruno. In 2016, she finally sought help. Quote, 204, quote, she told her therapist. Quote, 205, quote. Therapy helped her understand. She was trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to prevent death itself. Underscore, quote, underscore, 206, underscore, her therapist said. Underscore, quote, underscore, 207, underscore. Rachel learned to set boundaries, to recognize when concern was healthy and when it was compulsion. But the instinct never fully disappeared. She still notices, still worries, just manages it better now. David's depression hit hardest in 2012, 17 years after Bruno's death. He was working on a documentary about New Zealand cinema, and inevitably Bruno came up. Watching footage of Bruno from his prime, young, vibrant, healthy, David felt crushed. Quote, 208, quote, he thought. Quote, 209, quote. He couldn't finish the documentary, couldn't face Bruno's image. He called in sick. For a week. then 2 weeks, then a month. His wife noticed. "David, you need to talk to someone. This isn't just sadness. This is something deeper." He resisted at first, but finally agreed. The therapist diagnosed clinical depression, possibly present for years, but triggered acutely by the documentary project. "You're carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you," the therapist said. "Bruno's death wasn't your fault, and you couldn't have prevented it." "But I was there. I saw. I should have..." "Should have what? Diagnosed cancer through a camera lens? You're not a doctor. You were doing your job." David intellectually understood, but emotionally, that took years of work. He eventually finished the documentary in 2015 and included a segment about Bruno. It was painful, but cathartic. Mark's survivor's guilt manifested in his work. Every film he directed after Cosi felt like borrowed time. Bruno should still be directing, he'd think. __quote_216___. He threw himself into work, directed film after film, as if making up for lost time, or making up for Bruno's lost time. In 2018, he collapsed on set. Exhaustion, dehydration, stress. His doctor was blunt. "You're killing yourself. You need to slow down." Mark laughed bitterly. Bruno didn't get to slow down. He just stopped. The doctor referred him to a therapist who diagnosed what they called productive avoidance. "You're using work to avoid feeling, to avoid processing Bruno's death." "I processed it. It was 23 years ago." "Have you? Or have you just kept yourself too busy to think about it?" That hit home. Mark had been running for over 2 decades, and it was catching up with him. He took 6 months off, first time in his career, and actually dealt with his grief. It was hard, painful, but necessary. When he returned to directing, he was different, slower, more present, more aware of his cast and crew's well-being. Quote, 223, quote, he said in 2020, quote, 224, quote, "These 5 people, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, all dealt with trauma from those 2 weeks in January 1995. Different traumas, different manifestations, different timelines, but all rooted in the same experience, watching someone they cared about suffer, feeling powerless to help, carrying that weight for decades." In 2021, they all participated in a group therapy session together. First time in 26 years they'd all been in the same room for a non-work purpose. The therapist, Dr. Melissa Torres, specializes in collective trauma. "You 5 share a bond," she told them. "A traumatic bond. You witnessed something together, and you've each carried pieces of it alone. Today, let's put those pieces together. Share what you've been carrying, and see if we can find some collective healing." They went around the room, each sharing their experience, their guilt, their coping mechanisms, their ongoing struggles. And for the first time, they realized they weren't alone. They'd each thought they were the only one still affected. "I thought I was weak for still thinking about this," Sarah admitted. "It's been 26 years. Shouldn't I be over it?" "I felt the same," Tom said, "like there was something wrong with me for not moving on." Rachel nodded. "I kept telling myself, you didn't even know Bruno that well. Why are you still so affected?" David added, "I thought everyone else had processed it, and I was the only one stuck." Mark confessed, "I never even told my wife how much this bothered me. I thought she'd think I was making it about me when it should be about Bruno." Dr. Torres intervened. "What you're all experiencing is normal. Trauma doesn't have a timeline, and the guilt you feel, Survivor's guilt, witness guilt, is a natural response to this kind of event. But you need to understand, you didn't cause Bruno's cancer. You didn't make him hide his illness, and you couldn't have saved him even if you'd known from day one. The medical facts are clear. His cancer was advanced, inoperable, fatal. Nothing you could have done would have changed that outcome. What you can change is how you carry it going forward, not forgetting, not dismissing, but integrating, making it part of your story without letting it define you. That session was transformative, not a cure, but a turning point. They stayed in contact after, regular check-ins, support when needed, and they stopped carrying the weight alone. In 2022, they co-authored an article, When Witnessing Becomes Trauma, Lessons from the Cosi Set. Published in a film industry journal, it detailed their experiences, their struggles, their healing, and it called for better mental health support for crew members who witness medical emergencies or deaths on set. "We were left to process this alone," they wrote. "No debriefing, no counseling offered, no acknowledgement that what we witnessed was traumatic." The industry needs to do better, not just in preventing these situations, but in supporting people when they occur. The article sparked conversations, changes. Several production companies adopted post-incident counseling protocols. One company executive wrote to them, "Thank you. Our crew experienced a serious medical incident last year. Because of your article, we provided immediate counseling. Multiple crew members said it helped significantly." That felt like progress. Like Bruno's death was contributing to something positive. In 2023, a filmmaker named Jessica Chen, no relation to David, made a short documentary. __quote_ 244__. It focused on the Cosi crew, their experiences, their trauma, their healing. The film won awards, was shown at festivals worldwide, and opened up broader conversations about crew mental health. Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark all participated, shared their stories on camera. And at the premiere, they stood together, united not just by trauma, but by survival, by healing, by commitment to change. Sarah said in her interview, Tom added, Rachel reflected, quote, 250, quote, 251. David said, quote, 252, quote, 253. And Mark concluded, quote, 254, quote, 255. The documentary has been shown in film schools, used in mental health training, referenced in industry guidelines. It's become a teaching tool, a warning, a reminder that trauma doesn't just affect the person it happens to, it affects witnesses too. Today, in 2025, 30 years after those 5 days in January, the 5 people who were there are at peace. Not perfect peace, not complete healing, but acceptance. They've learned to live with what they witnessed, to honor Bruno's memory without being consumed by it. Sarah still runs the fund, but she's also learned to set boundaries, to care without compulsing. Tom still works in film, but he's learned to recognize his triggers, to step back when needed. Rachel still advocates for health awareness, but she's learned the difference between helping and controlling. David makes documentaries, including more about Bruno, but from a place of love, not guilt. And Mark directs, but with health protocols, with awareness, with compassion. They visit Bruno's grave together sometimes, once a year. On June 10th, the anniversary of his death. And they say the same thing, quote, 256, quote, 257, quote, 258, quote. They keep that promise every day, through their work, their advocacy, their openness. For Bruno, for themselves, for everyone who comes after. Forever. But Bruno Lawrence's story extends beyond those 5 people on the Cosi set. It ripples outward, to his family, his friends, the wider New Zealand and Australian film communities. And to understand the full impact of those 5 days in January, we need to understand those other circles of grief. Bruno's partner at the time of his death was a woman who requested to remain anonymous. But in 2010, 15 years after his death, she gave a single interview. Quote, she said, "This revelation shocked the Cosi crew when they learned of it." Sarah said, when the interview was published, the partner explained, "This information recontextualizes everything. Bruno didn't hide his illness because he was in denial. He hid it because he knew. And he wanted to keep working despite it. Or maybe because of it." Mark Jaffe, when he learned this, felt conflicted. "Part of me respects that Bruno made his own choice," he said in 2011. "He wanted to work, he knew the risks, and he did it anyway. But another part of me wishes I'd known, because if I had, I wouldn't have let him take the role. Or at least, I would have insisted on medical clearance." Did Bruno have the right to make that choice? Yes. But did I have the right to know? I think so too. This raises ethical questions. When does an actor's right to privacy outweigh a production's right to know about health issues? There's no clear answer, but the conversation is important. In 2015, New Zealand passed a law. __quote_272___. The law requires actors to disclose serious health conditions that might affect their ability to complete a production. It's not perfect. It raises privacy concerns, but it aims to prevent situations like Bruno's. Tom Reynolds testified in support of the law. __quote_273__. The law passed and has been used several times since, not to exclude actors, but to create support systems around them. One actor, diagnosed with early-stage cancer during pre-production, disclosed it per the law. The production adjusted the schedule, provided medical support on set, and the actor completed the film successfully. Quote 274, quote, that actor said. Quote 275, quote. Bruno's children also spoke out over the years. In 2017, his daughter gave an interview. "Dad was stubborn," she said. "He didn't like being told what to do, including by his own body. When he started getting sick, he ignored it. Then, when it became undeniable, he tried to work through it. That was who he was. Dedicated, driven. Maybe too driven." Do I wish he'd gotten treatment earlier? Yes. But would he have listened? Probably not. That wasn't Dad. Her brother added, "The Cosi crew shouldn't feel guilty. Dad made his choices. He knew what he was doing. If anyone should feel guilty, it's us, his family. We saw him deteriorating for months, and we didn't push hard enough either." This shared guilt across multiple groups, the crew, the family, the friends, shows how Bruno's illness affected everyone around him, and how everyone feels they could have done more. In 2020, a New Zealand documentary explored Bruno's full career. Bruno Lawrence, A Life in Film. The documentary included the Cosi section, but also his earlier work, his brilliance, his impact on New Zealand cinema, and it included interviews with actors who worked with him. Sam Neill said, "Bruno was one of the greats, truly one of the greats, and his death at 54 was a tragedy for all of us." I didn't know about Cosi, about how sick he was. If I had, I don't know what I would have done. Called him, maybe. Visited. But I didn't know, and by the time I found out, it was too late. Jeffrey Rush, who knew Bruno through the Australian film scene, reflected, "Bruno's death hit the whole community hard, because it reminded us, life is short, careers are fragile, and we need to take care of each other. After Bruno died, I made a point to check in on friends more, especially older actors, especially those who seemed to be struggling. I never want to be the person who learns someone was suffering only after they're gone. These reflections show how Bruno's death changed behavior, made people more aware, more proactive. His death became a teaching moment, a catalyst for change. In 2021, the New Zealand Film Commission established __290__. The award recognizes actors who advocate for health and well-being in the industry. Sarah Mitchell was the first recipient for her work with the Bruno Lawrence Memorial Fund. At the ceremony, she said, __291__. Tom Reynolds received the award in 2022 for his work on health and safety protocols. Rachel Goldman in 2023 for her advocacy work. David Chen in 2024 for his documentaries raising awareness. And Mark Jaffe is set to receive it in 2026 for his film __292__, and his production health policies. All five, all recognized, all continuing Bruno's legacy. In 2025, on the 30th anniversary of Bruno's death, a memorial was unveiled in Wellington, New Zealand, a bronze statue. Bruno, in mid-performance, captured forever in his element. The plaque reads, __293__. At the unveiling, actors, filmmakers, and fans gathered, hundreds of people, all touched by Bruno's work or his story. Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark stood together at the front of the crowd, and when the statue was revealed, they wept. Not from grief, but from pride, from gratitude. Bruno's life mattered. His death mattered, and his legacy continues. The ceremony ended with a film screening, __294__. Bruno's most iconic role. Watching it, seeing Bruno young and vital and alive, the 5 crew members felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for what was lost, but also joy for what was created, and determination to continue the work. After the screening, they stayed, in the empty theater, just the 5 of them. 30 years, Sarah said. Feels like yesterday. Feels like a lifetime ago. We've done good work, Tom said. Bruno would be proud. We're not done, though, Rachel added. There's more to do. There always is, David agreed. Mark concluded. As long as actors push through pain, as long as people suffer in silence, we keep working, keep advocating, keep Bruno's memory alive. They nodded, united in purpose, united in mission. For Bruno, and for everyone who comes after. Today, the legacy of those 5 days in January 1995 continues. The Bruno Lawrence Memorial Fund operates in 3 countries. The Performer Health Disclosure Act has been adopted in 5 countries. Health protocols are standard on film sets worldwide. And the conversation continues about health, about boundaries, about when to push and when to respect. There's no perfect answer, but awareness is growing. Systems are improving. Lives are being saved. All because of Bruno, and because 5 people decided his death wouldn't be in vain. Sarah is 70 now, still running the fund, planning to pass it to the next generation soon. Tom is 72, semi-retired, but still consulting on film safety. Rachel is 69, writing a book about her experiences, due to publish next year. David is 71. His latest documentary about actor health won awards. And Mark is 75. His final film releases next month, about an actor who learns to prioritize health over career. They're all slowing down, as bodies do, as time demands. But the work continues, through others they've trained, through systems they've built, through awareness they've raised. Bruno Lawrence died June 10, 1995, 54 years old. 5 months after those 5 days in January. He's been gone 30 years, but his impact remains. Not just in his films, though those are remarkable, but in the lives changed, the policies enacted, the conversations started. 5 people saw him die, and spent 30 years making sure that witnessing mattered. That's Bruno's real legacy, not how he died, but what his death created. Change, awareness, compassion, and a commitment that echoes across decades. Never again, never in silence, never without learning. For Bruno, for everyone he touched, for everyone who comes after, forever. There's one final aspect of Bruno Lawrence's story that deserves attention: the broader cultural shift his death helped catalyze, not just in film, but in how we think about work, health, and the pressure to perform through pain. In 2023, a cultural historian named Dr. Rebecca Martinez published a book, quote, 303. In it, she argues that Bruno's death became a watershed moment, a case study used across industries to examine toxic productivity culture. Bruno Lawrence worked himself to death, Dr. Martinez writes, not because anyone forced him, but because he'd internalized the message that stopping means failing. This message is everywhere, in film, in sports, in corporate culture. Push through, don't show weakness, the show must go on. But Bruno's death asked, at what cost? And his story, told by those 5 crew members who witnessed it, provided an answer. The cost is life itself. The book examines how Bruno's story has been used in workplace training, in medical ethics courses, in discussions about worker protections. One tech company executive, interviewed for the book, said, quote, 308, quote, 309, quote, 310. This cultural shift, from celebrating overwork to questioning it, can be traced in part to Bruno's story. Schools use it too. A high school health teacher in Auckland told Dr. Martinez, I teach the Bruno Lawrence case every year to show students your body gives you signals. Ignoring them can kill you. Students relate to it because of the film connection, but the lesson applies to everything: sports, school, jobs, life. Listen to your body. Ask for help. Don't sacrifice health for achievement. These are simple lessons, but powerful, and Bruno's story makes them real. In 2024, a medical school added Bruno's case to their curriculum as an example of patient autonomy versus medical necessity. Students debate, did Bruno have the right to refuse treatment and keep working, or should someone have forced him to stop? There's no consensus, but the debate is valuable. One student wrote in their reflection, quote, 315, quote, 316, quote, 317. Sports medicine programs use Bruno's case too, comparing it to athletes who play through injuries. A sports psychologist explained to Dr. Martinez, athletes face the same pressures Bruno did. If you sit out, someone takes your spot. If you admit pain, you're weak. Bruno's story helps athletes understand it's not weakness to acknowledge your body's limits, it's wisdom. We've had athletes cite Bruno when deciding to rest. I don't want to be the next Bruno Lawrence has become a phrase in locker rooms. This broader cultural impact, beyond film into medicine, sports, education, business, shows how one death can ripple outward. Bruno died in isolation, in pain, trying to keep working. 30 years later, his death is helping others choose differently. In 2025, on the 30th anniversary, multiple organizations held events honoring Bruno. Film festivals screened his work, universities held symposiums, theaters performed plays about his life. But the most touching tribute came from a group unexpected: construction workers in Wellington. They erected a small memorial at a worksite. It read, "For Bruno Lawrence and all workers who've pushed through pain, your health matters more than any job." Why construction workers? Because they face similar pressures. Injury rates are high. Admitting pain can mean losing work. One worker explained to a journalist, "We heard Bruno's story. Actor. Different world from ours, but same problem. Pressure to work through pain. So we're saying, not anymore. We look out for each other. If someone's hurt, we stop work. We get help. No job is worth dying for." This grassroots adoption of Bruno's story, by people he'd never met, in industries he never worked in, shows his universal resonance. The pressure to perform through pain isn't unique to film. It's everywhere. And Bruno's story speaks to everyone. Sarah Mitchell, now 70 and preparing to retire from the fund, reflected on this in her final annual report. Tom Reynolds, now 72, echoed this in a recent interview. Rachel Goldman, working on her book at 69, wrote in the introduction, quote, 332, quote, 333, quote, 334, quote, 335, quote, 336. David Chen, at 71, continues making documentaries. His latest, releasing next year, is titled __quote _ 337 __. It tracks the changes that have occurred since Bruno's death, the fund, the laws, the protocols, the cultural shifts. And it asks, are we doing better? The answer is nuanced. Yes, in some ways. No, in others. But importantly, we're trying. And Mark Jaffe, at 75 and directing his final film, includes a dedication. __quote _338 __. His film, a drama about a director who learns to prioritize her actors' well-being over production schedules, has already generated Oscar buzz. Critics call it a masterclass in compassion, a film that understands the human cost of art. But Mark knows, it's not just a film. It's his final statement, his answer to the question he's carried for 30 years. What would I do differently? The answer, in this film, is clear. Stop production. Prioritize health. Choose people over projects. It's what he wishes he'd done with Bruno, and what he's advocating for now. These 5 people, Sarah, Tom, Rachel, David, and Mark, have different perspectives, different approaches, different conclusions. But they're united in purpose. Making Bruno's death matter. Turning tragedy into change. Ensuring the next generation does better. And they have. The numbers don't lie. The Bruno Lawrence Memorial Fund has provided support to over 500 actors in 30 years. The health protocols inspired by his case have been adopted in 15 countries. The Performer Health Disclosure Act has led to 47 early diagnoses of serious conditions. Mark's films have been shown in 200 film schools worldwide. The documentaries have been viewed by millions. These aren't just statistics. They're lives. Lives changed. Lives saved. Lives made better. Because of Bruno. And because 5 people decided his death wouldn't be in vain. Today, as we approach the 30th anniversary in 2025, Bruno Lawrence's legacy is secure. not as the actor who died, but as the catalyst who changed things. His films remain masterpieces, his performances unforgettable. But his true legacy is the conversations he started, the changes he inspired, the lives he saved after his own ended. 5 people witnessed his death and spent 30 years making sure that witnessing mattered. That's the story, not of silence, but of speaking, not of guilt, but of action, not of tragedy, but of transformation. For Bruno, for those 5 witnesses who became advocates, for the hundreds who've been helped, for the thousands who've learned, for the millions who've been touched by his story, and for everyone who comes after, forever.